Get out of the car. Hold your hands to where I can see them. Elijah Moore, who wore an orange work shirt, complied under Officer Lance Garrison's command, which rang out in the afternoon air at the truck stop. Officer Lance Garrison walked around the cab like a predator, his short-sleeved uniform pressed despite the heat. People like you and your gang think they can haul drugs through my land. The sound of his latex gloves snapping as he pulled them imposed tension. Through the side mirror, Elijah Moore saw Officer Lance Garrison moving to his patrol car to retrieve a small plastic bag which contained some cocaine. The crooked cop had done this before, his movements skilled and confident. Little did Officer Lance Garrison realize that the sleeper trucker he was framing had been working undercover inside a drug network for almost 3 years, that the planted evidence was evidently fake. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. Elijah Moore's morning was just like any other morning. After giving careful thought to his planned route later that day, he'd pulled his 18-wheeler into Sunburst truck stop outside Memphis. Looking up, he found the service station lights dazzling, illuminating everything with a harsh yet clinical brightness. His blue jeans were dusted with the road. His orange work shirt was labeled Moore Independent Hauling, a cover identity he had maintained for 3 years. Elijah was checking his logbook when a patrol car pulled in behind him, with the emergency lights flashing red and blue on the concrete. Using his side mirror, he saw Officer Lance Garrison roll out of the vehicle in a manner that indicated this is not a regular safety inspection. The officer wore a sharp, short-sleeved uniform, and his metallic badge glinted in the overhead lights as he walked purposely. License, registration, and commercial driver's permit. Officer Lance Garrison's tone carried an edge of anticipated satisfaction, as if he already knew how this encounter would end. Elijah Moore reached for his wallet with measured movements, his DEA training automatically cataloging every detail of the officer's behavior. The way Officer Lance Garrison positioned himself slightly behind the driver's side door, the practiced scan of the truck's exterior, the subtle tension in his posture that suggested excitement rather than caution. "What's your cargo today, boy?" The racial slur hit the air like a physical blow, but Elijah Moore's expression remained perfectly neutral. "Agricultural supplies bound for Little Rock," he replied, his voice steady and respectful despite the churning anger in his chest. His 3 years undercover had taught him to compartmentalize rage, to transform it into cold, observational data that could be used later when justice finally arrived. Officer Lance Garrison peered at the contents of the paperwork with exaggerated facility, his eyes failing to focus on the paper. To the contrary, he seemed to stall the time as ever. The truck stop around them was yet another busy afternoon, with other truckers filling up, grabbing coffee, not paying attention to the daylight injustice just a few yards away. "I think you should know." Officer Lance Garrison moved in closer and whispered with malicious certainty, "I know you are the one. I believe boys, such as yourself, make use of these independent hauling operations to take more than just farm machinery. It appears that you're transporting something that doesn't belong on my roads." He grinned like a predator, an expression that showed he had played the game before and won. Organized racism was a feeling Elijah Moore was familiar with. Beneath that familiar crushing feeling was something else that Officer Lance Garrison was simply too oblivious to understand. For 3 years now, Elijah was building relationships with mid-level distributors in the Morales cartel network. He was working his way up the trust hierarchy towards Isabella Morales herself. Every mile driven, every conversation had, every risk taken was part of a little-known federal investigation capable of dismantling one of the Southeast's largest drug smuggling operations. "I will have to search inside your vehicle." Officer Lance Garrison's announcement wasn't a plea, It was a promise. The sound of his gloved fingers squeaking as he walked purposely around the truck signaled to me he was overly thorough. The fluorescent lights shining down from the truck stop's canopy illuminated every detail of his act, giving his performance even more slapstick through shadow. Elijah Moore stood where he'd been positioned, hands visible, posture compliant, but his mind was racing through protocols and contingencies. His DEA handler, Agent Sarah Chen, expected a check-in call in 4 hours. His cover identity was solid, backed by 3 years of genuine hauling jobs and carefully constructed relationships within the trucking community. But Officer Lance Garrison's obvious intent to plant evidence threatened to unravel everything in a matter of minutes. The corrupt officer completed his circuit of the truck and returned to his patrol car, making a show of speaking into his radio. Elijah Moore couldn't hear the words, but the body language was clear. Officer Lance Garrison was setting up his next move, probably calling for backup to witness whatever discovery he was about to stage. The casual confidence in his movements suggested this wasn't his first frame-up, that he'd refined this process through repetition and success. When Officer Lance Garrison returned from his patrol car, he carried a small plastic bag that hadn't been there during his initial approach. The cocaine inside was visible through the clear plastic, and Elijah Moore recognized the packaging style. It was consistent with product from the very network he'd been investigating, which meant Officer Lance Garrison either had direct connections to the Morales operation or had confiscated this evidence from a previous arrest and was now recycling it for his own corrupt purposes. "Found something interesting in your cab, didn't I?" Officer Lance Garrison held up the bag with theatrical triumph, but his eyes never left Elijah Moore's face, searching for the fear and desperation he expected to see. Instead, he found something that should have worried him: perfect calm. Elijah Moore's expression showed appropriate concern for someone being framed, but there was no panic, no pleading, no breakdown of composure that typically accompanied this moment in Officer Lance Garrison's previous performances. "That's not mine, officer," Elijah Moore said. The words had just the right amount of protest without crossing over into anger. His tone was respectful yet firm, the response of someone who knew enough about the system to realize that fighting back would only worsen the situation. Elijah Moore, however, was running his own investigation beneath that organized shape and remembering things that would later help in federal court. Officer Lance Garrison's handling of the evidence bag suggested he was not unfamiliar with the product inside. There was powder on his gloves that had not been there when he first put them on. He had recently handled cocaine during the preparation of this frame-up. The serial number on his body cam had been covered with electrical tape, suggesting premeditation and institutional corruption rather than spontaneous or random misconduct. "Course it's not yours," Officer Lance Garrison's voice dripped with sarcasm as he began photographing the planted evidence with his personal phone rather than official department equipment. "They never belong to boys like you, do they? Just magically appear in your vehicles like some kind of drug fairy sprinkled them there." His racist commentary continued as he documented his fabricated discovery, each word adding another layer to what would eventually become a federal civil rights violation. Elijah Moore absorbed every detail while maintaining his cover. The afternoon sun streaming through the truck stop's skylights created perfect visibility for anyone who might be recording this encounter. But Officer Lance Garrison seemed supremely confident that no such documentation existed. His movements were casual, unhurried, suggesting he'd never faced consequences for previous frame-ups and expected this one to follow the same successful pattern. The irony wasn't lost on Elijah Moore that he was being framed for possession of drugs from the same network he'd spent 3 years infiltrating. Officer Lance Garrison was unknowingly interfering with a federal investigation that could have put Isabella Morales and dozens of her associates behind bars for decades. The corrupt cop's racism had made him a perfect tool for criminals who needed honest truckers eliminated. and competition reduced on their smuggling routes. As Officer Lance Garrison completed his evidence-planting performance, backup units began arriving with sirens wailing and lights flashing. The corrupt officer had orchestrated this moment perfectly, ensuring witnesses would arrive just in time to see the aftermath of his discovery without observing the planting process itself. But what Officer Lance Garrison couldn't have anticipated was that his routine traffic stop had just compromised a multi-million-dollar federal investigation and placed him squarely in the crosshairs of the same justice system he'd been systematically corrupting. Elijah Moore is ironic that he was framed by the drugs of the same network in the leg that he had spent 3 years infiltrating. Officer Lance Garrison did not know that he was interrupting a federal prosecution, which might have put Isabella Morales and dozens of her associates in jail for decades. The racist nature of the corrupt cop made him a perfect tool for criminals to get rid of honest truckers and reduce competition in smuggling routes. As Officer Lance Garrison finished his performance of planting evidence, backup units began to arrive with sirens and lights. The officer had calculated things perfectly. Though there were witnesses, they'd arrive just after he discovered the planting. They would see the aftermath but not the planting. Officer Lance Garrison probably didn't realize he was about to mess up a multi-million-dollar federal investigation with a traffic stop, but now he is part of the same justice system this officer was corrupting. Officer Lance Garrison straightened up from Elijah's pickup cab. In his pale hands was now a transparent plastic bag filled with white powder, and he turned to Elijah with a triumphant grin. That expression reflected years of deception. "Wow, wow, wow," Officer Lance Garrison drawled, his voice dripping with fake astonishment and genuine malice. "What do we have here?" He held the bag up to the light, shaking it slightly for effect. "Looks like about 2 ounces of pure Colombian sugar." "That's a felony distribution charge, son." Elijah focused on breathing evenly, keeping his hands loose, even though the metal cuffs dug into his wrists. After 3 years of training on the inside, he had learned to suppress his rage and put the injustice in a drawer. However, viewing this dishonest cop brandish around planted evidence while spewing out racial slurs challenged every limit of his job discipline. "Officer, I've never seen that, never in my life," Elijah said calmly and innocently, the kind of confusion a legitimate trucker would do in this moment. "I conduct my business with utmost transparency. My record books, permits, and other legal papers are here for you to check." Officer Lance Garrison let out a harsh laugh and pulled out his smartphone to take pictures. "I am sure you do, Jamal or Daquan or whatever ghetto name your mama called you." He took numerous photographs of the bag, then numerous photographs of Elijah's truck, making sure everything was timed just right for the story he was going to tell. "You guys always run a clean operation until you get caught with your pants down." The Officer Lance Garrison spoke racist assumptions as if he had faced no consequences at all for making such assumptions. Elijah took note of the officer's change in body language, going from predatory tension to relaxed confidence. It appeared as though this wasn't his first time framing someone. His methodical documentation of everything suggested a corruption artist. "Tell me, what do you see when you look at me?" Officer Lance Garrison continued to circle around Elijah like a shark smelling blood and said, "I see another urban thug thinking he can run some drugs through my turf in a beat-up truck. Probably got 3 kids and 4 baby mamas throughout 3 states, living off the govs and the crime. Classroom, public assistance, and crime." Each one of those phrases was chosen to dehumanize and provoke Elijah, but he answered with the measured tone of someone who's been in volatile situations before and knows how to de-escalate. "Officer, you go ahead and test that and dust it for prints. I believe you won't locate any of my fingerprints there." Officer Lance Garrison's eyes narrowed at Elijah's composed response. Most people would be screaming, crying, or begging by now, but this trucker was displaying an unusual level of calm professionalism that didn't fit the corrupt officer's prejudiced expectations. "Oh, you're one of those smart mouth types," Officer Lance Garrison sneered, pulling out his radio. Think you know the system because you watched some cop shows. Let me educate you about how things work in the real world, homeboy. He keyed his radio with theatrical precision. Dispatch, this is Unit 7-4 requesting immediate backup for a felony drug possession arrest. Suspect is secured, but I need assistance with evidence processing and transport. The radio crackled to life. Copy that. Unit 7-4. Detective Santos is en route. ETA 5 minutes. Officer Lance Garrison clipped his radio back to his belt, then resumed his photographic documentation. Detective Santos is going to love this one. She's been tracking drug trafficking along this route for months. You just made her whole week, son. What Officer Lance Garrison didn't realize was that his choice of backup would prove to be a critical mistake. Detective Maria Santos had built her reputation on meticulous attention to detail and an unwavering commitment to actual justice, qualities that would soon put her at odds with this manufactured arrest. As they waited, Officer Lance Garrison continued his verbal assault. Bet you thought you were smart, didn't you? Driving that old Peterbilt instead of some flashy ride, trying to blend in with legitimate truckers. But I can spot your type from a mile away. The way you carry yourself, that prison posture, those shifty eyes always looking for an escape route. Elijah almost smiled at the irony. His posture was indeed different from civilian truckers, but it came from federal training, not prison time. His awareness of escape routes stemmed from tactical instruction, not criminal paranoia. Officer Lance Garrison was reading all the right signs but drawing completely wrong conclusions. Both men looked up at the sound of a vehicle. An officer parked a police-marked Ford Explorer behind Officer Lance Garrison's patrol car. Detective Maria Santos was wearing a green blouse and dark blue jacket, which were the markers of an experienced officer. Her Hispanic features set in professional neutrality. Dark eyes immediately began cataloging purposes like a detective with years of efficiency behind her. What we got, Garrison? She asks, her tone strictly business as she bends over the crime scene. Routine traffic stop turned into a major bust. Officer Lance Garrison replied, his voice filled with false pride. Found this character hauling serious weight through our jurisdiction. He held up the evidence bag. 2 ounces of premium cocaine, hidden in the cab like he owned the place. Detective Maria Santos accepted the bag and examined it closely, her expression revealing nothing. But Elijah caught the subtle way her eyebrows drew together, the slight pause as she processed what she was seeing. Something about the evidence or the scene wasn't adding up for her experienced eyes. Where exactly did you find this? She asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Right there in the cab. Officer Lance Garrison gestured vaguely toward the truck, tucked behind the driver's seat like he was saving it for later. Detective Maria Santos walked to the truck and peered inside, taking everything in with her eyes. The cab was very clean and orderly. The logbooks were properly arranged, and personal items were few and practical. The vehicle didn't match the profile of a drug dealer. Officer Santos, Elijah said carefully, using her rank rather than her detective title, in a subtle signal that any federal agent would recognize. I run legitimate freight operations under DOT regulations. My commercial license is current, my medical card is valid, and my logbooks are up to date with federal standards. Detective Maria Santos's head turned sharply at his precise use of federal terminology and regulatory knowledge. Most civilian truckers wouldn't phrase things quite that way, and they certainly wouldn't lead with federal compliance in a local drug arrest. What kind of freight do you typically haul? She asked, her voice carrying a new undertone of interest. Agricultural products, construction materials, sensitive cargo, things like that, which require special handling and sometimes a security clearance, Elijah said, emphasizing the last part to signal that he knows what he's talking about. Hilarious, Officer Lance Garrison said, this fool trying to be all professional. Santos, don't let him fool you with his words. I've traveled with this route for 5 years, and I know a drug runner when I see one." But Detective Maria Santos was now studying Officer Lance Garrison's behavior as much as she was examining the evidence. Something felt wrong about the entire scenario. The suspect was too calm, too knowledgeable about proper procedures. The cocaine was conveniently packaged and placed exactly where it would be easy to find, and Officer Lance Garrison seemed unusually eager to control the narrative. "How long have you been driving this route?" Detective Maria Santos asked Elijah. "This is my 3rd time through this jurisdiction in the past 18 months. Elijah answered truthfully, knowing his cover story was solid. Always following the same schedule, always carrying legitimate cargo with proper documentation. Detective Maria Santos made notes, but Elijah could see her connecting dots that Officer Lance Garrison couldn't perceive. If this was really a drug dealer, why would he keep using the same route where he'd risk recognition? Why would his truck be so meticulously maintained and organized? Why did he speak like someone with law enforcement training? "Santos, what's with all the questions?" Officer Lance Garrison interrupted, his confidence beginning to show cracks. "We caught him red-handed with enough coke to put him away for 10 years. Let's process him and move on." "Standard procedure, Garrison," Detective Maria Santos replied evenly. "Want to make sure our paperwork is bulletproof for the prosecutor." As she spoke, she positioned herself where she could observe both men simultaneously. Years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct was screaming that this arrest stank of corruption. "Detective Santos," Elijah said quietly, "I think there might be some confusion about my background and current operational status." It was another coded message, the kind of language that federal agents used when their cover was threatened, but not completely blown. Detective Maria Santos caught it immediately, her eyes sharpening with understanding. Officer Lance Garrison, oblivious to the exchange, was already planning his victory celebration. "Yeah, there's confusion all right. This boy's confused about which prison he's going to call home for the next decade." But Detective Maria Santos was now looking at the evidence bag with new suspicion, noting inconsistencies in how the powder had settled, questioning why there were no fingerprints on the outside of the bag, wondering why the placement seemed so convenient. The frame was still in motion, but the corrupt officer had unknowingly invited the one person who could unravel his entire scheme. A push from Officer Lance Garrison sent Elijah Moore through the heavy metal doors of the booking area at Riverside County Precinct, illuminated by fluorescent lights. The tall windows let in the afternoon sunlight, which combined with the artificial lighting to create a cold ambience that felt more sterile than judicial. With careful footsteps, Elijah Moore walked by the putrid gray walls that surrounded them, in an orange work shirt and blue jeans. "Got yourself another, boys," Officer Lance Garrison shouted to a room full of officers. Garrison's short-sleeved uniform was already showing sweat from the air conditioning. "Caught this one with enough blow to party all weekend." His laughter echoed off the concrete walls. Several officers looked up from their paper with different looks of interest and disgust. Officer Mike Torres, an officer with 20 years on the job, barely looked up from his computer screen. "Same route again, Lance? If I'm not wrong, this is the 4th incident this month?" His tone suggested more than a casual curiosity, even as his eyes kept glued to the monitor. "What can I say? I got a nose for this kind of thing," Officer Lance Garrison replied, roughly pushing Elijah Moore toward the booking station. "These truckers think they can just roll through our county like it's some kind of highway for their drug deals." "Well, not on my watch." Elijah Moore remained silent, his dark eyes taking in every detail of the precinct's layout, every face, every conversation. His years of undercover training had taught him that the most valuable intelligence often came from simply listening and observing. The way Officer Lance Garrison played to his audience, the subtle discomfort of some officers, the practiced routine of the booking process. It all painted a picture that went far beyond a single corrupt cop. The heavy footsteps of Captain Robert Hayes echoed down the corridor before the man himself appeared, filling the doorway to the booking area with his presence. His green polo shirt and blue jacket made him look friendly with a stern expression while he checks the situation from one end of the hallway so it befits a complaint. Captain Hayes has been in charge of this precinct for 12 years and likes to think he knows every officer here. "Garrison," said Captain Hayes, "come over here for a second." Officer Lance Garrison's self-assured look wavered for a brief moment before he reaffixed his smile. "Certainly, sir. Just processing another drug dealer." A large amount of cocaine was found in his vehicle during a traffic stop. Captain Hayes studied Officer Lance Garrison's face carefully, noting the eager enthusiasm that seemed excessive even for an officer with a good bust. "Routine stop, huh? What was the initial reason for the stop?" "Broken taillight," Officer Lance Garrison replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Soon as I approached the vehicle, I could smell marijuana. That gave me probable cause to search, and that's when I found the cocaine hidden in his cab." "Interesting," Captain Hayes murmured, making a mental note to review the dashcam footage. "And you're handling the processing personally because you know how it is in these cases. Establishing a chain of custody is essential, and I want to make sure everything is done right. Nobody is going to let that drug dealer go free on a technicality." With that, Captain Hayes nodded slowly, but as an experienced man, he noticed the eye of Officer Lance Garrison. Things were wrong with his story. The way he kept glancing at the evidence room for one. The way he was unusually enthusiastic about filling out paperwork he tries to avoid usually. That is more than enough. That deserves a double check. Officer Lance Garrison continued the booking. At the same time, Elijah Moore was being led toward the holding cells in the basement of the precinct. The fluorescent lighting down here was harsh. Just like upstairs, everything was well lit. The cells themselves were older, dating back decades ago, but clean and well maintained. As they approached the corner cell, the figure in the cell looked up. Tommy Richardson sat on the narrow bench, his orange jumpsuit marking him as a recent arrival. His eyes met Elijah Moore's for just a fraction of a second, and in that brief moment, recognition passed between them. Tommy had been working undercover with the ATF for 2 years, infiltrating gun smuggling networks that often intersected with drug operations. He'd seen Elijah Moore's photo in federal briefings, though they'd never worked together directly. "Fresh meat," Tommy called out with practiced disdain as Officer Lance Garrison unlocked the adjacent cell. "What they get you for, brother?" "Same old story," Elijah Moore replied, allowing a note of bitter resignation to enter his voice. "Wrong place, wrong time, wrong color skin." The words tasted like acid, but they served their purpose in maintaining his cover while subtly communicating with Tommy. Officer Lance Garrison slammed the cell door shut with unnecessary force. "Yeah, well, maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to transport drugs through my county." He walked away, his keys jangling with each step, leaving the 2 undercover agents alone in their adjacent cells. Tommy waited until the footsteps faded completely before speaking again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Bad break, man. Real bad break." The code words were subtle, designed to sound like sympathy while actually asking if Elijah Moore's cover was blown. "Could be worse," Elijah Moore replied, the response indicating that his identity was still secure, but the situation was complicated. "Might be here a while, though." This warned Tommy that the arrest could impact ongoing operations. Meanwhile, 3 floors above in the Detective Bureau, Detective Maria Santos was pulling case files from the past 6 months. Her red blouse caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows as she spread documents across her desk. Something about Officer Lance Garrison's latest arrest bothered her, and her instincts as an investigator were rarely wrong. The pattern emerged slow as she reviewed the files. 7 truck driver arrests on the same stretch of highway in just 4 months, with all suspects being black and drugs being discovered. It's further suspicious that 3 of those cases were dismissed, on account of irregularities in the handling of evidence, while in 2 other cases, significant plea deals were arranged. Detective Maria Santos took out her phone and called the district attorney's office. "Hey Jennifer, this is Maria Santos. Get me some files for an investigation. There is a pattern that doesn't make sense and I think we have a problem." 40 miles away at DEA headquarters in the federal building, Agent Sarah Chen stared at her computer screen with growing concern. Elijah Moore's check-in was now 3 hours overdue, which was completely out of character for an agent who had maintained perfect communication discipline for 3 years. She pulled up the GPS tracking for his truck and saw that it had been stationary at the Riverside County precinct for the past 2 hours. Agent Sarah Chen immediately began cross-referencing the location with recent police activity reports. When Officer Lance Garrison's name appeared on the arrest report for a drug trafficking suspect at that exact location and time, her blood ran cold. She grabbed her secure phone and began making calls to her contacts in local law enforcement. Back at the precinct, Officer Lance Garrison was having his own problems in the evidence room. The plastic bag of cocaine he'd planted in Elijah Moore's truck was identical to dozens of others in the evidence locker, and for good reason. Over the past year, he'd been systematically stealing drugs from solved cases, replacing them with baking soda or flour, and using the real drugs for his frame-up operations. The system was elegant in its simplicity. He would steal drugs from cases that were already closed, plant them on carefully selected targets, usually black truckers traveling alone, who fit his racist profile, and then discover the evidence during routine stops. The arrests made him look good to his supervisors, while the drugs he recovered went right back into evidence storage, where he could steal them again for future operations. What Officer Lance Garrison didn't realize was that his carefully selected targets weren't random at all. The stretch of highway he patrolled was a known corridor for the Morales cartel's operations, and his actions had been systematically eliminating legitimate truckers and independent operators who might have witnessed or interfered with cartel shipments. From his cell, Elijah Moore watched Officer Lance Garrison's movements through the precinct with professional interest. The corrupt officer's behavior patterns, his routes through the building, his interactions with other personnel, it all suggested someone who was operating outside normal procedures. More importantly, some of the names Officer Lance Garrison mentioned in casual conversation were names that had appeared in Elijah Moore's intelligence reports about the Morales organization. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Officer Lance Garrison wasn't just a racist cop looking to pad his arrest statistics. He was unknowingly working as an asset for the very criminal organization that Elijah Moore had spent 3 years infiltrating. The corrupt officer's frame-up operations were serving as a protective screen for cartel activities, eliminating potential witnesses and clearing the highways for drug shipments. Detective Maria Santos's investigation was yielding similar conclusions from a different angle. The dismissed cases all involved truckers who had been traveling routes that intersected with known drug corridors. The evidence tampering wasn't random incompetence. It was a systematic pattern designed to create the appearance of active law enforcement while actually facilitating criminal activity. As the afternoon wore on, the various threads of investigation began converging on the same disturbing truth. Officer Lance Garrison's racism had made him the perfect unwitting tool for the cartel's operations. His eagerness to target black truckers had eliminated witnesses and competition, while his sloppy evidence handling ensured that legitimate truckers wouldn't face serious charges while real criminals operated freely. Agent Sarah Chen's calls to the precinct had reached Captain Hayes, who was now reviewing dashboard camera footage from Officer Lance Garrison's recent stops. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. The same routine, the same targeting criteria, the same suspicious discoveries of evidence in locations that suggested planting rather than concealment. Investigators were picking up their speed now. Several law enforcement agencies were starting to look into Officer Garrison, but time was running out. Due to the blown cover of Elijah Moore, 3 years of painstaking intelligence gathering were at risk. The Morales organization was about to find out their unwitting protection from the cops was up. In the holding cell, Elijah Moore watched what was happening in the precinct closely and carefully as he waited for things to play out. The crooked officer who endeavored to set him up was soon discover that he unintentionally declared war against the entire federal law enforcement institutions. As the sun began to set and the investigation was entering its crucial stages, agencies were closing in on a corruption racket that reached deeper in the police than anyone had suspected. Agent Sarah Chen was in a green blazer and dark blue slacks that conveyed a federal air, and every officer straightened up at her approach. Walked into the brainstorming room, she carried with her the quiet confidence of one who had brought down crime rings across 3 states, and today was no different. Energized, she could feel the spark in the air that always preceded a major breakthrough. "I need to see Officer Lance Garrison right now," Agent Sarah Chen said to the desk sergeant as her federal identification shone under the overheads. "There is a subject of an ongoing federal investigation involving our agency, like subject." Upon seeing her DEA ID, the desk sergeant's eyes widened. "I will go fetch him right away, Agent Chen. He is processing a drug arrest." Officer Lance Garrison stepped out of the processing room with a wrinkled, short-sleeved uniform. He walked confidently until the moment his eyes fell upon federal credentials. Upon seeing the badge, he grew timid. His face paled as the meaning started to begin to set in. "Officer Garrison, I'm Agent Sarah Chen with the Drug Enforcement Administration," she said, giving him her best federal voice. "I understand that this morning you arrested a trucker on charges of drug possession. I'd like to review your arrest report immediately." Officer Lance Garrison shook a tiny bit when he handed me the paperwork. It was a normal traffic stop, Agent Chen. The cab had cocaine hidden in it when it was searched. Agent Sarah Chen scanned the report with practiced efficiency, her expression growing increasingly stern. Each line revealed new procedural violations that made her jaw tighten. The timeline didn't match standard protocols. The search justification was inadequate, and the evidence documentation was suspiciously sparse. "Officer Garrison, this report indicates you conducted a vehicle search without proper probable cause documentation," Agent Sarah Chen said, her green blazer catching the fluorescent light as she turned to face him directly. "Federal guidelines require specific justification for searches of commercial vehicles." Captain Robert Hayes had been watching the interaction from his office doorway, and the federal agent's presence demanded his immediate attention. His blue jacket was perfectly pressed, despite the early hour, and his expression carried the weight of 30 years in law enforcement. "What's the nature of this federal interest, Agent Chen?" Captain Robert Hayes asked, stepping into the conversation with the authority of his rank. "We've been monitoring trafficking patterns along this highway corridor for 18 months, Agent Sarah Chen explained, her tone professional but pointed. "Your Officer Garrison may have inadvertently interfered with an ongoing federal operation." Officer Lance Garrison's panic was becoming visible as sweat beaded on his forehead. "I followed standard procedures, Captain. The suspect was acting nervous, and I had reasonable suspicion to search." Detective Maria Santos walked over to them, holding a manila envelope thick with papers. Despite an all-nighter, the crispness of her red blouse indicated that sleeplessness did not dull her red lipstick, and the satisfaction of an investigator who smelled big corruption. "Captain Hayes, I need to tell you about my initial findings concerning Officer Garrison's latest arrests." Detective Maria Santos opened a file. "I have discovered a troubling pattern that must be addressed." Captain Robert Hayes gestured toward his office. The fluorescent lighting, illuminating the tension, etched on everyone's faces. "Let's discuss this privately. Officer Garrison, you're coming with us." Inside the captain's office, natural light from the skylights mixed with the overhead fluorescence, creating an atmosphere of stark revelation. Detective Maria Santos spread her documentation across the desk like pieces of a criminal puzzle, finally coming together. Over the past 8 months, Officer Garrison has arrested 17 black truckers on this highway. Detective Maria Santos began, her findings laid out in chronological order. Every single arrest involved planted evidence that was later dismissed or reduced due to procedural errors. Officer Lance Garrison's face went pale as the scope of his exposure became clear. Those were legitimate arrests, Detective Santos. I can't help it if the suspects were all black. The statistical probability of that racial concentration is less than 1%. Agent Sarah Chen interjected, her federal training in pattern analysis, making the corruption obvious. This represents systematic targeting based on race, which violates multiple federal civil rights statutes. Captain Robert Hayes studied the documentation, his 30 years of experience recognizing the signs of corruption he had hoped never to see in his precinct. Each arrest report showed the same pattern of suspicious searches and convenient evidence discoveries. There's more, Captain. Detective Maria Santos continued, pulling out the financial documents and the communication logs. Officer Garrison has been receiving payments through offshore accounts linked to criminal networks. The bombshell had gone off now. Agent Sarah Chen realized what this meant for her federal investigation, while Captain Robert Hayes understood the depth and breadth of the rot at home. They are not for my police work, Officer Lance Garrison protested, but it came out sounding desperate. I have investments, side businesses. Your investments happen to coincide perfectly with Isabella Morales and her trafficking network, Agent Sarah Chen said, producing federal intelligence files that made Officer Lance Garrison's face go ashen. Every payment you received corresponds to a legitimate trucker being removed from routes that Isabella Morales uses for smuggling. The connection between Officer Lance Garrison's racism and the cartel's business strategy became crystal clear. Isabella Morales had been using corrupt police officers to eliminate honest competition while protecting her own smuggling operations. Isabella Morales has been systematically corrupting law enforcement officers to clear her trafficking routes, Detective Maria Santos explained, her investigation revealing the criminal network's sophisticated approach. She identifies officers with racial prejudices and exploits their biases to target legitimate truckers. Officer Lance Garrison's corruption had made him the perfect asset for the cartel. His willingness to target black truckers aligned perfectly with Isabella Morales's need to eliminate independent operators who might witness or interfere with her smuggling activities. The trucker you arrested this morning, Elijah Moore, fits the exact profile of drivers that Isabella Morales wants eliminated, Agent Sarah Chen said, watching Officer Lance Garrison's reaction carefully. Independent operators with clean records who know the highways and might notice suspicious activities. Captain Robert Hayes was beginning to understand the full scope of the corruption within his department. Officer Lance Garrison's racism hadn't just made him a civil rights violator, it had made him an unwitting asset for an international drug trafficking organization. How many other officers are involved in this network? Captain Robert Hayes demanded, his authority carrying the weight of immediate consequences. Our investigation suggests Officer Garrison was specifically recruited because of his documented history of racial profiling, Detective Maria Santos replied, her red blouse catching the light as she leaned forward. Isabella Morales's organization conducts psychological profiles of police officers to identify those most susceptible to corruption. The sophistication of the cartel's police corruption strategy was becoming apparent. They hadn't just bribed random officers. They had systematically identified and recruited those whose personal prejudices aligned with their business needs. Every black trucker Officer Garrison arrested was removed from Isabella Morales's smuggling routes during critical shipment windows, Agent Sarah Chen explained, her federal intelligence painting a clear picture of orchestrated corruption. His racism made him predictable and controllable. Officer Lance Garrison slumped in his chair as the full extent of his manipulation became clear. He had thought his targeting of black truckers was his own decision. But Isabella Morales had been pulling his strings for months. "The payments you received weren't just bribes, Officer Garrison," Detective Maria Santos said, her investigation revealing the cartel's manipulation tactics. They were performance bonuses for eliminating competition from Isabella Morales' trafficking corridors. Captain Robert Hayes realized that his precinct had been infiltrated by an international criminal organization that had weaponized one officer's racism for their own purposes. The implications for departmental integrity were staggering. This morning's arrest of Elijah Moore may have been the mistake that exposes Isabella Morales' entire network, Agent Sarah Chen said, her federal perspective revealing the broader implications. His profile as an independent trucker made him appear like a perfect target. The irony was becoming apparent to everyone except Officer Lance Garrison. His racist assumptions about Elijah Moore had led him to target exactly the wrong person at exactly the wrong time. "We need to coordinate our investigations immediately," Captain Robert Hayes declared, his leadership experience recognizing the need for swift action. This corruption goes beyond one officer's prejudices. Detective Maria Santos gathered her documentation while Agent Sarah Chen prepared her federal files. The convergence of their investigations had revealed a criminal network that used police corruption as a business strategy. "Officer Garrison, you're suspended immediately pending federal investigation," Captain Robert Hayes announced, his authority cutting through any remaining pretense. "Your badge and weapon, now." Officer Lance Garrison's world was collapsing around him as he realized that his racism had made him a pawn in a criminal organization he barely understood. His hatred had been weaponized against his own community and profession. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter as the scope of corruption and manipulation became clear to everyone in the room. Isabella Morales had turned Officer Lance Garrison's prejudices into a criminal asset, and now federal justice was closing in on the entire network. Agent Sarah Chen's next words would change everything for Elijah Moore and expose the full extent of the conspiracy that had used racism as a tool for international drug trafficking. The fluorescent lights in Captain Robert Hayes' office cast harsh shadows across the faces of everyone present as Agent Sarah Chen reached into her green jacket and withdrew a leather credential case. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to intensify the gravity of the moment as she held the federal identification with practiced authority. "Captain Hayes, Detective Santos, I need to inform you that the individual you have in custody is Agent Elijah Moore of the Drug Enforcement Administration, currently operating under deep cover in a federal investigation." The utterance disturbed the chambers like a clap of thunder. Officer Lance Garrison had been leaning casually against the wall in his long-sleeved uniform. At this moment, he straightened. The brightness of the office lights made the color disappear from his face, thus making him look gray. His smug smile disappeared as horror dawned on him. The implications crashed over him wave after wave like a tsunami. "I can't believe it," Officer Lance Garrison said, shivering. "He's just another drug dealer I caught with cocaine in his truck. Another criminal." Agent Sarah Chen's face remained professional yet cold as she opened a secure tablet and presented some documents. After spending 3 years undercover with the Morales cartel drug smugglers, Agent Moore says, "You have interfered with a multi-million-dollar federal investigation." Captain Robert Hayes leaned anxiously forward in his chair, a flush of rage and embarrassment on his face. "Agent Chen, I need you to tell me exactly what happened here." Officer Garrison reported finding cocaine during a traffic stop. The cocaine Officer Garrison planted. Detective Maria Santos stepped forward, showing her own paperwork. Her red blouse shone in the reflection of the lights. "I have been looking into a trend of suspicious arrests that have been occurring along Officer Garrison's normal patrol route. Black truckers are being targeted. Drugs are allegedly being found, but for some reason, cases have been falling apart with the defense pointing to evidence discrepancies." Lance Garrison, an officer, began to shake as he realized the walls were closing. "None of that matters," I followed protocol. I found drugs. I made a legitimate arrest. Agent Sarah Chen's voice sliced through his protests like a knife. Officer Garrison, you are presently the subject of a federal investigation for civil rights violations, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. Your protocol involves focusing on individuals by race and planting evidence against them to falsely arrest them. The door of the office opened, and Agent Marcus Rivera walked in along with other federal agents wearing tactical gear and orange shirts under their blue jackets. The two muscular guys stood in the door and scans the room with professional efficiency. Agent Marcus Rivera's demand is responsible for the immediate arrest of Officer Garrison and taking him into federal custody. To preserve evidence in connection to the arrest, Officer Lance Garrison's legs nearly buckled as he grasped the magnitude of his situation. This is insane. I was doing my job. I was fighting crime, getting drugs off the street. You were violating the constitutional rights of American citizens. Agent Sarah Chen responded sharply. Your racism and corruption have now interfered with a federal investigation that has taken years to develop. Captain Robert Hayes stood up abruptly, his face a mixture of anger and professional damage control. Officer Garrison, you are immediately suspended pending federal investigation. Badge and weapon, now. With trembling hands, Officer Lance Garrison unclipped his badge and holstered weapon, placing them on Captain Hayes's desk. The metallic sounds seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet office as his career crumbled before his eyes. I want to see Agent Moore immediately, Agent Sarah Chen declared. We need to assess the damage to our operation and determine how to proceed. Detective Maria Santos led them through the precinct hallways, past officers who watched with growing curiosity as federal agents moved through their workplace. The fluorescent lighting followed them as they walked, creating an almost surreal atmosphere of institutional authority being challenged and transformed. In the holding area, Elijah Moore sat calmly on a bench, his orange work shirt and blue jeans unchanged from his traffic stop. Despite hours in custody, his demeanor remained composed, professional, alert. When he saw Agent Sarah Chen approaching, relief flickered across his features for just a moment before his undercover discipline reasserted itself. Agent Moore, Sarah Chen said formally, your cover has been compromised. We're extracting you from the situation immediately. Elijah Moore stood up, his full height and presence suddenly seeming different to everyone watching. No longer was he just another arrested trucker. He was clearly a federal agent with years of training and experience. His calm during the arrest now made perfect sense to Detective Maria Santos, who had wondered about his unusual composure. How much of the operation is blown? Elijah asked, his voice now carrying the crisp professionalism of law enforcement rather than the casual drawl he had maintained during his arrest. We're assessing that now, Agent Marcus Rivera replied, unlocking the holding cell. But first, we need your full report on Officer Garrison's behavior and any connections you might have observed to the Morales network. As they moved to a secure conference room, Officer Lance Garrison was escorted past them in handcuffs, federal agents flanking him on either side. His eyes met Elijah's for a moment, and the full weight of his mistake was written across his pale face. The racist assumptions that had driven his actions now confronted him with the reality that he had targeted a federal agent, a man whose dedication and professionalism far exceeded his own. In the conference room, under bright overhead lighting, Elijah began debriefing the events of the past few hours. Officer Garrison exhibited behavior consistent with practiced evidence planting. His movements were too smooth, too confident. This wasn't his first time. That matches our investigation, Detective Maria Santos confirmed, spreading files across the table. We've identified at least 12 similar cases over the past 18 months, all black truckers, all cases that fell apart due to evidence problems. Agent Sarah Chen took notes rapidly as Elijah continued his report. The cocaine he planted appeared consistent with the product I've been tracking through the Morales network. high purity, distinctive packaging. Either he's directly connected to the cartel or he's stealing from their shipments. According to Agent Marcus Rivera, both options have positive outcomes and we can leverage them. If this guy is stealing from them, they'll want him dead, which also makes them leverage. Captain Robert Hayes walked into the conference room, looking tired and washed out from the bright fluorescent light. Agent Chen, I want to help you as much as I can. Officer Garrison's actions do not reflect this department's values or standards. Well, Captain, thanks for your cooperation, Agent Sarah Chen said with efficiency. But we need to widen the net in our investigation. We need to find out how deeply cartel corruption runs in local enforcement. The implications hung heavy in the air. Officer Lance Garrison's racism had made him an easy target for cartel manipulation. His willingness to target black truckers providing perfect cover for protecting drug shipments while eliminating legitimate competition and honest drivers. Elijah leaned back in his chair, 3 years of careful work flashing through his mind. The Morales network has been using corrupt officers to control trafficking routes. Independent truckers like my cover identity represent competition and potential witnesses. Garrison's frame-up attempts serve multiple cartel interests. Explain, Agent Marcus Rivera requested, his tactical mind already working through possibilities. By targeting legitimate truckers, especially black drivers, Garrison eliminates honest competition while creating arrest statistics that make him look effective. The planted evidence comes from cartel shipments, which helps dispose of product that might otherwise be tracked. And the racism provides perfect cover because his superiors expect him to arrest black drivers anyway. Detective Maria Santos felt sick as the systematic nature of the corruption became clear. He's been using institutional racism as a weapon for organized crime, and now he's facing federal civil rights charges in addition to drug trafficking and obstruction of justice. Agent Sarah Chen noted with satisfaction, Judge Patricia Washington has already issued warrants based on Detective Santos' preliminary investigation and today's events. Agent Marcus Rivera's radio crackled with an update from federal headquarters. Additional tactical teams are en route. We're treating this as a major corruption investigation with national security implications. The revelation that a federal undercover operation had been compromised sent shockwaves through the precinct. Officers who had witnessed Officer Lance Garrison's arrest began questioning everything they thought they knew about their colleague. His confidence in targeting black drivers, his unusual success rate in drug arrests, his casual racism that many had overlooked or dismissed, all suddenly appeared in a sinister new light. Agent Moore, can you resume your cover identity? Agent Sarah Chen asked. Or has Garrison's interference made that impossible? Elijah considered the question carefully. Depends on how we handle this. If word gets out that I'm federal, the entire 3-year operation is finished. But if we can control the information flow, we might be able to salvage it. How? Agent Marcus Rivera inquired. Garrison's arrest could be explained as federal investigation into police corruption, not related to me specifically. My release could be attributed to evidence problems with his case. I could return to the road as if I was just another victim of his frame-up attempts. Detective Maria Santos saw the genius in the approach. That actually strengthens your cover. You become a trucker who survived police corruption, rather than someone who might be working with law enforcement. Agent Sarah Chen began coordinating with federal prosecutors. We'll need to move quickly. Every hour increases the risk that word leaks to the cartel network. As if summoned by her words, Agent Marcus Rivera's secure phone rang with an urgent call. The room fell silent as he answered and listened intently. Understood. We'll implement immediately, he said before ending the call and turning to the group. Judge Washington has fast-tracked federal charges against Officer Garrison. Civil rights violations, drug trafficking, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. She wants to send a clear message that racist corruption will face the full weight of federal prosecution. Officer Lance Garrison, now in a federal holding cell, was learning that his years of targeting innocent people based on their race had finally caught up with him. The institutional protection he had enjoyed as a police officer evaporated when faced with federal civil rights charges. His comfortable assumption that his badge would shield him from consequences crumbled under the weight of federal investigation. What about the other officers Detective Santos identified as potentially compromised? Captain Robert Hayes asked. "We're expanding the investigation," Agent Sarah Chen confirmed. "This goes beyond one racist cop. We're looking at systematic corruption that has protected drug trafficking while targeting innocent citizens." Elijah felt a sense of professional accomplishment and personal vindication. Years of work building connections with criminals and risking his life every day collecting intelligence was about to be ruined by the officer's racist remarks. However, the same corruption is now offering fresh opportunities to attack the cartel's operations at the core level. Detective Maria Santos said, looking over her files. Garrison's arrests corresponded with known cartel shipment timings. He didn't just seek out black truckers, he was clearing the way for cartel shipments. A clearer picture of just how much Officer Lance Garrison betrayed his oath emerged. He had turned his badge, his authority, and society's racism into weapons to serve organized crime, destroying innocent lives. The federal charges he now faced not only serve as punishment for his crimes, but also as a declaration that this kind of corruption will not be tolerated anymore. Lance Garrison, the cop's racially biased presumptions, have caused him to go after the wrong man. This blunder will bring down a whole network of crime and corruption, operating under the radar for a long time. The harsh fluorescent lights behind him glared down on the shiny conference table in the federal briefing room. Elijah Moore sat across from Agent Sarah Chen and Agent Marcus Rivera. Although the wrinkles on his orange trucking company shirt or blue jeans revealed the great ordeal he had gone through, he maintained a straight posture. After a racist traffic stop blew away 3 years' worth of a carefully constructed existence, the real work could now begin. "I want to know everything about the Morales operation." Agent Sarah Chen slid the digital recorder across. Her green blouse was clean, and despite the last few hours, her dark hair was tightly pulled back. Her expression was focused on whatever was coming up. Elijah Moore leaned forward, his voice steady and methodical. "Isabella Morales runs a sophisticated network using legitimate trucking companies as cover. She's been recruiting independent drivers like my cover identity, offering them premium rates to transport what they think are legal goods. The drugs are hidden in false compartments built into shipping containers." Agent Marcus Rivera, his muscular frame filling out his tactical uniform, took detailed notes. "How deep does the police protection go?" "Deeper than we thought," Elijah Moore replied, his jaw tightening as he recalled the morning's events. Officer Lance Garrison's behavior wasn't random racism. He specifically targets black truckers on Highway 95, the main route Isabella Morales uses. "I thought he was just another corrupt cop skimming drugs, but it's more systematic than that." Agent Sarah Chen's eyes narrowed as she processed this information. "You're saying Officer Lance Garrison was deliberately eliminating independent competition?" "Exactly. Isabella Morales pays corrupt officers to harass and arrest legitimate truckers who might stumble onto her operation or compete for routes. Officer Lance Garrison plants evidence, files false reports, and creates a paper trail that makes honest drivers look like criminals. Meanwhile, her protected drivers move freely." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Officer Lance Garrison's planted cocaine had come from the same network Elijah Moore had been infiltrating for 3 years. The chemical analysis would later prove the drugs matched samples from previous cartel seizures, providing additional evidence against the organization. Agent Marcus Rivera stood and walked to the whiteboard mounted on the wall. "We need to know who else is compromised. If Officer Lance Garrison is feeding information to the cartel, Isabella Morales already knows about his arrest." As if summoned by their conversation, Detective Maria Santos knocked on the briefing room door. Her red blazer stood out against the sterile government environment as she entered carrying a thick file folder. "We've got a problem," Detective Maria Santos announced, her expression grim. "I've been monitoring police communications since Officer Lance Garrison's arrest. 3 different patrol units have called in reports about federal agents at the precinct. If Isabella Morales has sources in dispatch or administration, she knows something's wrong." Agent Sarah Chen cursed under her breath. 3 years of careful planning were unraveling by the hour, but experienced agents learned to adapt quickly. "What's your assessment of departmental compromise?" Detective Maria Santos opened her file and spread photographs across the conference table. Each image showed Officer Lance Garrison with different individuals, all taken during off-duty hours. "These surveillance photos go back 18 months. Officer Lance Garrison meets regularly with known associates of the Morales organization. We've identified at least 4 other officers who've attended the same gatherings." "Sons of bitches," Agent Marcus Rivera muttered, studying the photographs. "How did Internal Affairs miss this?" "They didn't miss it," Detective Maria Santos replied sharply. "They've been building a case, but federal jurisdiction took precedence when your undercover operation began. We've been documenting everything, waiting for the right moment to move." Elijah Moore examined the photographs, recognizing several faces from his undercover work. "That's Carlos Mendez," he said, pointing to a thin man in designer clothing. "He coordinates shipping schedules for Isabella Morales. And that woman in the red dress is Sofia Rivera, her lieutenant who handles police relations." The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Officer Lance Garrison's racism had made him an easy target for cartel recruitment. His prejudices against black truckers aligned perfectly with Isabella Morales' need to eliminate independent competition while maintaining her network's security. Agent Sarah Chen stood and began pacing, her mind working through contingencies. "We need to salvage this operation. 3 years of work doesn't die because one corrupt cop got greedy." "What are you thinking?" Agent Marcus Rivera asked. Recognizing the determined look in his colleague's eyes, "We turn Officer Lance Garrison's corruption against them. Federal charges filed against him that could send him away for 20 years. That's some powerful leverage." Detective Maria Santos rolled her eyes. "You're looking to flip him? Given what he did to Agent Moore?" Elijah Moore's inner voice took over. "Personal feelings don't matter. If we can use Officer Lance Garrison to nail down Isabella Morales and the whole network, we use him. The lack of justice does not only bring harm to individuals, it harms the social fabric." Meanwhile, in the heart of the city, at a fancy restaurant, Isabella Morales sat in a private dining room, wearing a red silk dress that hugged her curves. With loose dark hair and manicured fingers, she looked every inch the elegant hostess, but the little fingers drumming the tablecloth told a different story. The call from the police contact came an hour ago, and she was still digesting it. "Officer Lance Garrison was arrested?" she asked her lieutenant, Sofia Rivera, who sat across from her in a matching red blazer and black pants. "Federal charges," Sofia Rivera confirmed. "Civil rights violations, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice. The DEA was involved, which means someone higher up is paying attention." Isabella Morales' mind raced through the possibilities. Officer Lance Garrison knew about several shipments, safe houses, and meeting locations. If he decided to cooperate with federal agents, her entire Eastern Corridor operation could be compromised. "What about the trucker he arrested?" Isabella Morales asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Sofia Rivera replied, consulting her notes. "The arrest report says he was carrying cocaine, but federal agents showed up and had him released within hours. Either he's incredibly well connected, or there's more to his story than Officer Lance Garrison realized." Back at the precinct, Captain Robert Hayes was having the worst day of his 25-year career. His blue police captain's uniform felt heavier than usual as he sat in his office reviewing Officer Lance Garrison's personnel file. The fluorescent ceiling lights illuminated years of commendations and performance reviews that now looked like elaborate cover for systematic corruption. Chief Daniel Brooks knocked and entered without waiting for permission. His blue uniform jacket bore the weight of command, but his expression showed the strain of managing a department under federal investigation. "How bad is it, Robert?" Chief Daniel Brooks asked, settling into the chair across from Captain Robert Hayes's desk. "Worse than we thought. Detective Maria Santos has evidence that Officer Lance Garrison has been feeding information to criminals for at least 2 years. He's been targeting legitimate truckers while protecting actual drug shipments, and that's just what we know so far." Chief Daniel Brooks rubbed his temples. "The media is going to crucify us. Racist cop plants drugs on undercover federal agent. It's a headline that writes itself." "It gets worse," Captain Robert Hayes said, sliding a computer printout across his desk. "I've been reviewing Officer Lance Garrison's arrest records. Over the past 18 months, he's made 17 drug arrests on Highway 95. 16 of them were black truckers. 15 cases were dismissed due to evidence problems or procedural violations. The pattern was undeniable. Officer Lance Garrison had been using his badge and authority to systematically target black drivers, creating an environment of fear and suspicion while protecting criminal operations. His racism hadn't just made him corrupt, it had made him the perfect tool for cartel manipulation. Chief Daniel Brooks stood and walked to the window, overlooking the parking lot. News vans were already setting up, their satellite dishes pointing toward the sky like accusations. "What about the other officers Detective Maria Santos identified?" "We're conducting discreet interviews, but we have to assume the corruption goes deeper. If Officer Lance Garrison was being paid to target specific drivers, someone was giving him intelligence about routes and schedules." In the federal building, Agent Sarah Chen was coordinating with prosecutors to structure a cooperation agreement that would maximize Officer Lance Garrison's usefulness while ensuring appropriate punishment. The racist cop who had tried to frame an undercover agent was now their best hope for taking down an international drug network. "The irony is perfect," Agent Marcus Rivera observed as they reviewed surveillance footage from Officer Lance Garrison's arrest. "His planted evidence matches our samples from the cartel network. He literally provided additional proof against the organization he was protecting." Elijah Moore watched the footage of his own arrest, seeing Officer Lance Garrison's confident racism from a new perspective. He genuinely believed he was framing just another black trucker. The idea that his target might be federal law enforcement never occurred to him. "That's the thing about racism," Detective Maria Santos said, joining them in the observation room. "It makes people stupid." Officer Lance Garrison's prejudices blinded him to obvious warning signs that should have made him cautious. Agent Sarah Chen nodded grimly. Isabella Morales exploited his racism perfectly. She didn't have to corrupt him so much as redirect his existing corruption toward her purposes. Officer Lance Garrison was already abusing his authority against black drivers. She just helped him monetize it. The full scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. Isabella Morales had identified racist officers like Officer Lance Garrison and turned their prejudices into weapons against legitimate competition. By encouraging and rewarding their targeting of black truckers, she had created a protective barrier around her own operations while eliminating independent drivers who might accidentally discover her network. As evening approached, the various investigations were converging into a comprehensive picture of systematic corruption. Officer Lance Garrison's racism had made him vulnerable to manipulation. His corruption had compromised law enforcement integrity, and his cooperation with criminals had protected a multi-million-dollar drug operation. But the same evidence that exposed the conspiracy also provided the tools to destroy it. Officer Lance Garrison's detailed knowledge of cartel operations, combined with Detective Maria Santos's documentation of police corruption and Elijah Moore's 3 years of undercover intelligence, created an unprecedented opportunity for justice. Agent Sarah Chen looked at her watch and made a decision. We move forward with the cooperation agreement. Officer Lance Garrison wears a wire, maintains contact with his cartel handlers, and helps us map the entire network. Then we bring them all down together. The unraveling had begun, but the real justice was still to come. The Federal Command Center was buzzing as Agent Sarah Chen put her headset on and looked at the wall of monitors displaying surveillance feeds, communications intercepts, and more. For 72 hours, people have spent their lives in an improvised operation headquarters, and the sunlight streaming through the reinforced windows has cast shadows of maps and evidence across the office. She was wearing her green tactical vest, and under the bright lights, she was coordinating the most complicated sting operation ever attempted by her team. Officer Lance Garrison slumped over a metal table in the adjacent interrogation room. His blue police uniform no longer evoked authority. Instead, it represented shame. His short-sleeved shirt, which had always been a symbol of his power, clung to his sweat as maniac agents prepared him for the performance of his life. As Agent Marcus Rivera, an imposing muscular man clad in tactical gear, escorted him to a table and set down the recording equipment. His hands shook. "You understand the gravity of your situation, Officer Garrison." Agent Marcus Rivera's voice carried the weight of federal authority as he secured the wire transmitter to Officer Lance Garrison's chest. 15 years minimum if you refuse to cooperate. Life imprisonment if we discover you've been holding back information about cartel operations. Officer Lance Garrison's pale complexion had grown ashen since his arrest. The racist confidence that had defined his interactions with Elijah Moore now replaced by desperate fear. "I never meant for it to go this far," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the electronic hum of recording equipment. "Isabella Morales approached me 2 years ago, said she needed protection for legitimate shipping operations." Agent Sarah Chen leaned forward, her experienced interrogation instincts recognizing the partial truth wrapped in self-serving lies. "Officer Garrison, we have financial records showing payments of over $200,000 from shell companies connected to the Morales cartel. This wasn't protection money for legitimate operations." The corrupt officer's shoulders sagged as the full weight of his compromised position became undeniable. Through the observation window, Detective Maria Santos watched with satisfaction as years of suspected corruption finally faced exposure. Her red blouse caught the morning light as she documented every admission for the comprehensive internal affairs report that would reshape departmental policies. Elijah Moore entered the command center, his presence immediately commanding attention from every federal agent in the room. Despite the compromise of his 3-year cover, his professional demeanor remained unshaken. His orange shirt and blue jeans maintained the trucker persona that had served him so well. But now everyone understood the exceptional courage required to maintain that identity under extreme pressure. "Agent Chen, I'm ready to resume undercover operations," Elijah Moore announced, his calm voice reflecting years of specialized training. "Isabella Morales doesn't know my cover has been blown. We can use Officer Garrison's corruption to our advantage." Agent Sarah Chen nodded approvingly as she reviewed the operational timeline displayed across multiple computer screens. "The plan is elegant in its simplicity, Agent Moore. Officer Garrison reports to his cartel contact that the problem trucker has been eliminated. You return to your established route with full federal surveillance protection. When Isabella Morales feels secure, she'll resume normal operations." The technical sophistication of the federal sting operation impressed even seasoned law enforcement veterans. Agent Marcus Rivera had coordinated tactical teams at 6 strategic locations along the smuggling route, each position carefully selected to provide comprehensive coverage without alerting cartel security measures. Unmarked surveillance vehicles, aircraft support, and communication intercepts created an invisible net that would capture every aspect of the criminal network. Tommy Richardson's voice crackled through encrypted communications from his position within the cartel organization. Federal Command, this is Ranger 7. Target Isabella is scheduling a major shipment for tomorrow evening. Officer Garrison's report about eliminating the trucker threat has convinced her the route is secure. Judge Patricia Washington had worked through the night, reviewing warrant applications and ensuring every aspect of the operation met constitutional standards. Her judicial oversight provided legal protection that would withstand defense challenges during prosecution. The federal courthouse had become a secondary command center, with clerks processing search warrants and seizure orders as fast as agents could request them. Officer Lance Garrison's cooperation revealed corruption, extending far beyond his individual actions. Detective Maria Santos cross-referenced his admissions with her internal affairs investigation, discovering a network of compromised officers who had been protecting cartel operations for years. Each name he provided triggered additional warrants and expanded the scope of federal intervention. Isabella Morales has been brilliant in her corruption strategy. Agent Sarah Chen observed as she analyzed the intelligence reports flowing across her screens. She targeted officers with financial problems, gambling debts, or personal vulnerabilities. Officer Garrison's racism made him particularly susceptible because he genuinely believed he was only targeting criminals. The psychological manipulation revealed by the investigation demonstrated the cartel's sophisticated understanding of human weakness. Isabella Morales had convinced officers they were protecting legitimate businesses while gradually involving them in evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and direct drug trafficking. The corruption had become so normalized that officers like Lance Garrison genuinely believed their actions served law enforcement goals. Captain Robert Hayes arrived at the command center as the operation moved into its active phase. His blue jacket bore the weight of commanding officers who had betrayed their oaths and the community they swore to protect. Agent Chen, my department is fully committed to this operation. We've isolated the officers under investigation and implemented emergency protocols to prevent intelligence leaks. The federal sting operation required precise timing as multiple criminal activities occurred simultaneously across a 100-mile corridor. Agent Marcus Rivera monitored tactical frequencies while coordinating with state police, border patrol, and international agencies tracking the Morales network. Every communication was recorded, every financial transaction traced, and every participant identified for prosecution. Elijah Moore's return to undercover operations carried additional risks now that his federal identity was known to corrupt officers. Agent Sarah Chen had implemented enhanced security measures, including duplicate surveillance teams and emergency extraction protocols. His truck now carried concealed recording equipment that would capture every criminal conversation and transaction. The irony is perfect. Detective Maria Santos observed as she watched Officer Lance Garrison prepare to contact his cartel handlers. His planted cocaine actually came from the same network Agent Moore was investigating. Officer Garrison was unwittingly providing evidence against his own criminal associates. Judge Patricia Washington's legal preparations ensured the sting operation would produce prosecutable cases against every participant. Her coordination with federal prosecutors had prepared indictments for racketeering, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and drug trafficking charges that would dismantle the entire network. The judicial oversight provided legitimacy that transformed the investigation from revenge into justice. Inside the cartel, Tommy Richardson possessed the intelligence to reveal the full extent of operations. Shipping routes that moved hundreds of millions in drugs annually, money laundering operations across multiple states, and a corruption network that had penetrated police agencies all over the area. The report described criminal activity that required federal intervention to address capability. With federal agents watching, Officer Lance Garrison's hands trembled as he called Isabella Morales' contact number. The success of the operation hinged on the talks. He had to convince cartel leadership that the trucking route was safe, Most importantly, while the feds were listening and taking notes, Isabella, it's Lance. His voice carried false confidence as he delivered the rehearsed message. That trucker problem we discussed has been permanently resolved. The route is clean for your next shipment. Isabella Morales's voice carried the cold calculation of a criminal mastermind as she responded to Officer Garrison's report. Excellent work, officer. Your efficiency in handling problems has always impressed our organization. The next shipment will be our largest yet. Agent Sarah Chen smiled grimly as she monitored the recorded conversation that would serve as evidence in federal court. Isabella Morales's casual discussion of eliminating a trucker problem demonstrated the callous disregard for human life that characterized cartel operations. Every word strengthened the federal case against the entire network. The sting operation revealed years of systematic corruption as Officer Lance Garrison's cooperation exposed evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and protection of drug shipments. Detective Maria Santos documented each revelation, building comprehensive cases against officers who had betrayed their oaths for cartel money. The scope of corruption extended to evidence rooms, court security, and even prosecutor communications. Agent Marcus Rivera's tactical teams moved into final positions as intelligence confirmed the cartel's plan to resume major smuggling operations. Aircraft surveillance tracked vehicles, communication intercepts monitored criminal conversations, and undercover agents prepared to document every aspect of the operation. The federal net was closing around Isabella Morales and her network. Elijah Moore's professionalism under extreme circumstances had impressed even veteran federal agents. His ability to maintain cover while being framed by a corrupt officer demonstrated exceptional training and personal courage. Agent Sarah Chen recognized that his experience would become a case study in federal law enforcement academies for years to come. The command center buzzed with controlled excitement as the operation entered its final phase. Years of investigation, months of planning, and days of coordination were about to culminate in the largest cartel bust in regional history. Officer Lance Garrison's corruption had unknowingly provided federal agents with the intelligence needed to dismantle the entire network. Judge Patricia Washington's oversight ensured every arrest warrant was properly executed and every piece of evidence legally obtained. Her judicial authority provided the legal framework that would withstand appeals and defense challenges. The federal court system was prepared to process dozens of defendants and millions in seized assets. As evening approached, Agent Sarah Chen felt the familiar tension that preceded major law enforcement operations. The stakes couldn't be higher, with years of corruption about to face justice and a criminal network about to learn that their protection had become their destruction. Tomorrow would bring either comprehensive victory or devastating failure, with no middle ground possible in federal law enforcement. Marcus Rivera adjusted his tactical gear and checked his watch that was dangling from his elbow. As he did so, darkness engulfed the industrial area. 03:47 a.m. In 13 minutes, a coordinated series of raids would begin in 7 states across the country, targeting every cell in Isabella Morales's smuggling network, identified by Elijah Moore's 3-year investigation. The parking lot of the abandoned warehouse was alive with controlled chaos as federal agents made final adjustments to their drone and assorted gadgetry, donning their vibrant tactical gear under the command center's fluorescent lighting. Agent Sarah Chen checked in over the radio to the Phoenix team. While at the control console, dressed in a tactical jacket unzipped over her tactical vest, she was conducting the largest DEA multi-jurisdictional operation in 5 years. Her fingers skimmed the screens, tracing teams stretching from Miami to Seattle who were seconds away from hitting the core of the cartel's operation. Agent Marcus Rivera pressed his earpiece, his muscular frame tense with anticipation. Phoenix leader, all teams green and ready. Around him, tactical agents conducted final equipment checks, their movements precise and methodical. The months of preparation that had followed Officer Lance Garrison's forced cooperation were about to culminate in what could be the most significant blow against international drug trafficking in decades. 2 miles away, in the federal courthouse, Judge Patricia Washington reviewed the final warrant packages in her chambers. The elderly judge wore a blue jacket over her judicial robes, her weathered hands steady as she signed authorization after authorization. Each signature represented months of investigation, thousands of hours of surveillance, and the careful construction of cases that would withstand any legal challenge. Her desk lamp cast bright light across documents that would reshape law enforcement's understanding of how deeply corruption could penetrate institutional systems. Judge Washington put down her pen and straightened her blue jacket. "Send them in," she said. "Your Honor," her clerk said through the intercom, "the prosecutors are ready for your final review. It is high time that justice is not only served, but also seen to be served." As the clock struck 4 a.m., the first assault was launched. The agent Marcus Rivera walked through the door to the warehouse. At the same time, the second raid was taking place. Likewise, simultaneous raids were taking place all over the country. In her penthouse in Miami, Isabella Morales was going through her ledgers, which showed she hadn't opened this in years. The agents hustled in, and before she could react, they placed her in handcuffs. She was in a red silk robe and red slippers, and you could see what a far fall it was from her king-sized bed to being presented in cuffs, surrounded by tactical gear. She was all the way up to the top tier of criminal mastermind who could not be touched by feds, but here she was, helpless as she was, being three-fingered by agents into a car, while everyone was serving arrest warrants for agents outside the warehouse. Agent Sarah Chen watched the real-time feeds from her command center, her heart racing as reports flooded in. Phoenix leader, Miami reports Isabella Morales in custody. Dallas secured the primary distribution center. Seattle has the money laundering operation. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes shone with the satisfaction of seeing years of work reach fruition. By sunrise, the scope of the operation's success became clear. 47 arrests across 7 states, $18 million in seized assets, enough cocaine to supply a small city for months, now locked in federal evidence facilities. Most importantly, the complete dismantling of a network that had operated with impunity for nearly a decade. The local precinct buzzed with activity as federal agents processed evidence and coordinated with local law enforcement. Captain Robert Hayes stood in his office, his blue jacket open over his uniform shirt, watching the organized chaos with a mixture of pride and shame. Pride in his officers like Detective Maria Santos, who had helped make this possible. Shame that his department had harbored corruption for so long without detecting it. "Captain?" Detective Maria Santos knocked on his doorframe, her red blouse bright under the office's fluorescent lighting. "The federal prosecutors want to brief us on Officer Lance Garrison's sentencing hearing. It's scheduled for this afternoon." Captain Robert Hayes nodded grimly. "Maria, I want you to know how proud I am of the work you did on this investigation. Without your instincts that day at the traffic stop, none of this would have been possible." Detective Maria Santos straightened, her dark pants pressed to perfection despite the long hours she'd been working. "Sir, with respect, it was Elijah Moore's professionalism under extreme circumstances that made this possible. All I did was recognize when something didn't smell right." The federal courthouse filled with an unusual crowd that afternoon. News vans lined the street outside as word of the massive cartel bust spread through media channels. Inside courtroom 7, the overhead fluorescent lights illuminated a scene that would be remembered as a landmark moment in the fight against both drug trafficking and police corruption. Officer Lance Garrison sat at the defendant's table, his civilian clothes a stark contrast to the uniform he had worn with such arrogance months earlier. His blue dress shirt and dark slacks couldn't hide the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of federal charges that had destroyed his career and his life. The man who had once strutted around Elijah Moore's truck with racist confidence now looked like exactly what he was: a disgraced criminal awaiting justice. Judge Patricia Washington walked into the courtroom with careful steps, her black robes a trifle too big for her and flared out over a black jacket. The old lady judge had handled thousands of cases in her day, but none carried the symbolic weight of this sentence. The moment the woman sat down behind the bench, the courtroom fell silent to hear the woman speak. Attention in the court. United States v. Lance Michael Garrison, the bailiff said in the high-ceilinged courtroom. Elijah Moore sat in the gallery, his green button-down shirt and blue jacket making him look more like a businessman than the undercover agent who had endured racist persecution and maintained his cover under extreme pressure. Agent Sarah Chen sat beside him, her red blazer professional and understated. Behind them, Captain Robert Hayes and Detective Maria Santos represented the law enforcement officers who had chosen justice over the thin blue line of corruption. Judge Patricia Washington reviewed the sentencing documents, her expression grave. The courtroom's natural skylight supplemented the fluorescent lighting, ensuring every detail of this historic moment was clearly visible. When she finally looked up, her eyes found Officer Lance Garrison with laser focus. "Lance Michael Garrison," Judge Washington said, "you pled guilty to federal civil rights violations, as well as drug trafficking, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to distribute narcotics. The court wishes to address more than just your offenses, but what they mean before I impose sentence." Officer Lance Garrison stood unsteadily as his attorney in a dark suit stood beside him. Fluorescent lights above seemed to glare down to showcase how much weight he lost during the amount of time he sat in jail. Judge Washington continued speaking, her blue jacket clearly visible below her robes as she leaned forward. "Your actions betray not only your oath as a member of the police service, but also everything the justice system stands for. You used the badge and uniform given to you by the community to carry out racial discrimination, falsely frame innocent citizens, and protect criminal enterprises. Apart from harming your individual victims, your corruption damaged the public's trust in law enforcement and allowed drug dealers to poison communities without a care in the world." The judge spoke with an increase in volume. This revealed her passion for justice. "The evidence indicates you zeroed in on black truckers on interstate routes, planting drugs and filing false reports in the casual manner of one who had done this many times before. And the racist comments you made while arresting Agent Elijah Moore showed that you were not just personally prejudiced, but were systemically abusing your power against likely dozens of innocent citizens." Agent Sarah Chen felt tears gathering in her eyes as she watched justice being delivered with the precision and dignity it deserved. Her red blazer rose and fell with deep breaths as months of frustration and determination culminated in this moment of accountability. Furthermore, Judge Washington continued, "Your connection to the Isabella Morales cartel network shows how corruption creates criminal opportunity. By targeting legitimate truckers and protecting cartel operations, you became an active participant in drug trafficking that brought violence and addiction to communities across multiple states." The judge paused as for a moment no sound was heard in the court. The U.S. sentencing guidelines suggest imprisonment from 12 to 15 years. However, given the breadth of the crimes for which you have been found guilty, the impact on the civil rights of the jurisdiction, and your abuse of your office and public trust, the court hereby sentences you to 18 years imprisonment in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. You are further ordered to 3 years supervised release upon your release from prison. The tension that had built up in the courtroom for months finally broke. Officer Lance Garrison wobbled in his legs and held on to the defendant's table. The swaggering man who had walked around the truck of Elijah Moore would now face almost 20 years in the clink. Judge Washington still had more to say. "Furthermore, you will be permanently banned from any position in law enforcement, required to pay restitution to your victims, and subject to civil rights monitoring for the duration of your release. This is a sentence not just for your crimes, but a repudiation from society of the racism and corruption which you represent. Elijah Moore's reactions were twofold. As the gavel fell and Officer Lance Garrison was led away in handcuffs by bailiffs, his heart raced, but with pleasure and sadness. Justice may have prevailed, but the road to the courtroom revealed bigger systemic problems beyond one corrupt officer. 3 weeks later, in the main conference room of the police department, Chief Daniel Brooks made the announcement of wide-ranging reforms to avert corruption in future. Illuminated by the fluorescent lights above, officers representing all ranks and all divisions in immaculate uniforms gazed attentively. The Commission of the Police Officer Standoff Resolution. Chief Brooks, a fine gentleman with gray hair, was dressed in blue. Today is not just the end of a corruption scandal, but the beginning of a new era of accountability and community trust, said Brooks. Detective Maria Santos has been promoted to lieutenant and heads our new Civil Rights Compliance Unit. This group will be federally supervised and directly report to us to stop the systematic abuse we have seen. Maria Santos stepped forward. The red blazer contrasted sharply with the blue uniforms around her. The promotion that elevated her was not a personal promotion, but rather a department promotion to the officer who chose courage over cowardice to face corruption. Officers were told by Santos, "We will be requiring bias training as part of our new protocols, improving internal affairs, and allowing community oversight boards with real investigative powers. We're equipping our officers with body cameras, which will be monitored federally, making constitutional policing our goal, not a dream." Captain Robert Hayes gave a nod from the front row in his blue jacket as reassurance to the department. Meanwhile, at a community center in town, Elijah Moore spoke in front of a full auditorium on police accountability and the need to oppose racism. "What happened to me could happen to anyone," Elijah Moore told the diverse crowd of community members, civil rights activists, and concerned citizens. "The difference was that I had federal protection and legal resources that most victims of police corruption never access. Our goal should be ensuring that constitutional rights aren't privileges reserved for federal agents, but guarantees extended to every citizen, regardless of race or economic status." A middle-aged woman in a red sweater raised her hand. "Agent Moore, how do we know these reforms will actually be implemented? We've heard promises before." Elijah Moore stood at the podium with a serious expression. "Ma'am, that is the right question to ask. Real change necessitates constant vigilance on the part of community members like you. Federal oversight is not temporary. It is permanent until we can show that we are doing constitutional policing consistently. Ultimately, though, accountability does come from the citizens who will not accept discriminatory and corrupt practices as normal." A boy in an orange hoodie stood at the back. "My cousin got arrested last month, and we think the officer planted drugs on him. If we don't have federal agents investigating, how can we get help?" "That's what Lieutenant Santos's new Civil Rights Unit is designed to address," Elijah Moore responded. "Every complaint will be investigated with federal oversight, and community members will have direct access to independent review boards. The days of police investigating themselves behind closed doors are over." The applause that followed reflected not just approval, but hope that systematic change was finally possible. Later that evening, Agent Sarah Chen met Elijah Moore at a quiet restaurant downtown. The natural lighting from large windows had given way to warm interior lighting, creating an intimate atmosphere for their debriefing conversation. Agent Sarah Chen wore a red blouse with a dark jacket, her professional appearance relaxed after months of high-pressure operations. "So what's next for the famous Agent Moore?" she asked, cutting into her dinner with precise movements. Elijah Moore adjusted his green shirt and smiled. "Actually, the Bureau wants me to head up a new unit focused on investigating police corruption and civil rights violations. Apparently, our success with the Garrison case has convinced headquarters that we need specialists who understand both federal criminal investigation and community policing issues. Agent Sarah Chen raised her glass in a toast to justice served and justice ongoing, to accountability and the hope that cases like this become unnecessary. Elijah Moore responded, clinking his glass against hers. The city continued to buzz as evening fell, unaware of how the resolution of this case would overshadow law enforcement for decades to come. The vast corruption network that had seemed untouchable less than a year ago is now confined to cell blocks and evidence lockers. Most notably, the systematic reforms carried out in wake of the crimes of Officer Lance Garrison had begun to alter how police departments across the country administer accountability and community relations. While tabulating the next assignment of Elijah Moore, he is confident that justice is done and thoroughly served. For almost 20 years, Officer Lance Garrison reflected on how his racism and corruption were ultimately to blame for the downfall of the criminal empire he served. The oversight and protections of the community got enhanced. Most important, the case had shown that no one, regardless of their badge, was above the law. The story of corruption and redemption was complete, but the ongoing work of ensuring justice remained constant, requiring vigilance from citizens, courage from honest officers, and unwavering commitment to the principle that in America, constitutional rights belong to everyone. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.